Welcome to Blog Talk Radio in high fidelity.
Join us for today's episode of the Utopian Realities Slope, Save Life on Planet Earth Blog Talk Radio show, bringing you solution bearers with practical, proven, scientific ways to help you eliminate global level irradiation and extinction level threats from your body and bringing forward the means to restore and sustain global waters, air, soil, and sentient life. Welcome.
Greetings. This is Siava, also known as Lisa Wolf, your host. Welcome to the Utopian Realities, from concept to planetary restoration, Slope, Save and Sustain Life on Planet Earth, Earth Aid Now, Sunday Solution Bearers Forum, where we bring you solution bearers who can help us to mend the sacred hoop of life. As always, listeners, follow the link to listen to the program and to join the live chat page and phone 845-277-9359 with questions or comments. Thank you for joining us for this Sunday Solution Bearers Forum when our guest is Sky Blue, Executive Director of the Fellowship for Intentional Community, as we explore how we can peacefully, equitably, and sustainably coexist. Intentional communities address social and economic issues. Since 1987, the Fellowship for Intentional Community has been a resource and proponent of intentional communities. Multiple secular models exist: housing cooperatives, eco-villages, income-sharing communes, and co-housing. Restructuring society based on cooperation, sustainability, and social justice can be learned as people live while decreasing resource consumption and waste, foster peaceful relationships and conflict resolution, and participatory democracy, economic justice, and gender equality. Individual lifestyle choices are leveraged with collective action and experiment with a holistic approach to addressing social issues. Groups explore legal and financial structures, install renewable energy systems, share resources, and collective governance. Our guest today, Sky Blue, over the last 18 years has been a member of Twin Oaks Community, a housing collective, a student housing cooperative, and a co-housing community. He's helped start 2 small worker cooperatives and a small car sharing system. He's visited dozens of communities and cooperatives in the U.S. and in Europe. Living in community and furthering the larger cooperative movement has been a primary focus of his entire adult life. He's played a formal or informal role in a number of projects, including board member and consultant to the forming community Eco Village Charlottesville, consultant to the West Coast Communities Conference, staff facilitator for Peach, a community healthcare fund. He also consults on a limited basis with other forming or developing groups. At Twin Oaks, he's had many jobs, including manager of the Twin Oaks Communities Conference, serving on numerous community committees, production and management for the community's soy foods business, and serving on the planning committee for the Twin Oaks 50th anniversary celebration in 2017. He also serves as one of the Twin Oaks delegates to the Federation of Egalitarian Communities. On a more personal level, Sky is an amateur musician and DJ and loves organizing all manner of events, from parties to conferences. Personal growth and healthy interpersonal relationships are another focus of his life. He's the father of a teenager. His life is about bringing people together to make the world a better place for everyone. Welcome, Sky.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So tell us about your journey to fully immersing yourself and living about community development and sustainable communities?
Yeah, it's definitely been a family affair for me. I kind of go back as far as my great-grandfather on my dad's side, who was a campaign organizer for Eugene V. Debs back in the 1920s, who was a communist candidate for presidency and received a significant amount of the popular vote while in jail for being a communist. So, there's definitely been that tendency on at least that side of my family for a long time. And then in the late 70s, my parents actually met at Twin Oaks Community. They had both moved there independently and then met, fell in love, and ultimately had me. I wasn't born there or raised there, but I have a couple half-siblings that did spend a few years there, one of whom went back when he was an adult, when I was a teenager. And then my other half-sibling spent several years of her college career in the student housing cooperatives at UC Berkeley. And then I spent a year in a student housing cooperative at UC Santa Cruz, and then ultimately, after deciding college wasn't for me, found my way back to Twin Oaks as well. So I definitely feel like, even though I wasn't raised there, it's been a sort of family home for me for my whole life on some level. When I went back there when I was 19 for the first time, just being there just very much felt immediately like home. And then raising my son there has also just has felt completely natural. I mean, on some level, raising a child outside a community, I can't quite imagine how people do it, really. So yeah, so I mean, I've lived in, and my father also helped start a co-housing community in Chico, California when I was a teenager, and I spent some time there before moving out on my own, including becoming a member of the Consensus group there, and so that was before the student housing co-op. So yeah, it's been in my family, and it's just been a key focus of mine. I mean, I think when I dropped out of school, a big reason was that I felt like I was learning more living in the student housing co-op and the responsibilities I was taking on there than I was in college. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like that was much more the direction I wanted to be headed.
That's a very good point, because as I told you, when I dropped out in 92 and started living in communities, I had been in university, and I had reached a point where I felt, oh my goodness, my head can be so full of knowledge, but I need to connect to the earth. I need to learn other things. And and it really is a whole other way of being to learn about. And so the topic of our conversation is, how can we peacefully, equitably, and sustainably coexist? What does that have to do with community?
Well, a lot of what community is about is sharing. We're looking at putting our lives together in different ways that allow us to share resources, share our lives, in ways that help us practice these different kinds of values. And I particularly highlight the values of cooperation, of sustainability, of social justice, and other things that you mentioned, participatory democracy. How do we make decisions about shared resources? And ultimately, I do believe that this is the fundamental question of our times as humanity grows and becomes ever more populous on this finite planet, and we are forced to confront decreasing resource base and increasing climate and environmental instability. We are forced to work together more, and we have to figure out how to do that peacefully, how to share peacefully. So this is the fundamental question of an issue of humanity at this point. And so intentional communities provide a kind of laboratory and human scale opportunity to really see what that looks like. And I think the key thing to keep in mind here is that what intentional communities are about is sharing resources, is sharing some kind of land base or other kind of facilities or other kinds of resources. The Fellowship for Intentional Community defines an intentional community as a group of people who live together or share common facilities and who regularly associate with each other on the basis of explicit common values. So again, there's some economic, financial, resource-based connection there. But then there's also the shared values, or you could say the intent of the intentional community that comes in, that helps provide that sort of basis. Now, obviously, historically, that's come in much more from a religious perspective. Most of the early intentional communities, or that you would define them in the U.S., were more religious based, and of course, you could say, monasteries of various traditions around the globe going back millennia are kinds of intentional communities. But I think in today's day and age, we're now looking at, with the diversity of different religious and spiritual perspectives, we're needing to transcend that kind of model as a binding force and really look more at what is the core of what it is that needs to bind us together as human beings to make this world livable and sustainable for everyone, for all people and all life on the planet. So again, intentional communities are these very specific human scale laboratories for us to be working on what this looks like, and then hopefully then be able to share that with the rest of the world.
Right. And Twin Oaks, how then is the community organized? As an example, the land, how do people live? Is everyone working within the community? Do you share meals? Do you have a school within the community, or do your children go to public school? What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Twin Oaks is actually a particularly interesting example of secular intentional community, and in some ways, it's structured almost more like a religious community. Its tax status is in fact a 501(d), which is what most monasteries are organized under. The key facet of that tax status is not in fact a religious or spiritual basis. It's shared treasury. And so Twin Oaks is one of only a handful of secular intentional communities in the country that are income sharing, meaning all of the income that's earned by the community through its businesses or from the individual members is pooled. And then the community has a democratic process for budgeting money that then goes towards paying for all of the different systems that are collectively run by the community that provide for all of the needs of the community. So internal to the community, there's no money exchanged. It's all based on a labor system. You are responsible for working a certain number of hours a week, both in the income and domestic areas of the community. And in exchange, you have access to all of the resources of the community, which includes systems for providing food, clothing, shelter, health, dental, vehicles, and many more amenities as well. So you could say that Twin Oaks is really taking this sharing thing to an extreme. Some people say that if it's possible to share something, Twin Oaks has figured out how to do it. There's and how that works is by making sure that people are getting their needs met. So it's not an easy thing, and especially financially, making that work is tricky. How Twin Oaks has made it work largely is by having a couple large businesses. Historically, Hammocks was the biggest one, and then for the last number of years, our soy foods business has been growing as our hammocks business has actually been shrinking. But those are the two big businesses that we have. And then we also have a collective of people who do indexing or creating the indexes in the backs of books. We have a small ornamental cut flowers business and a few other smaller enterprises. We also do a little bit of partnering with the main business of our sister community, Acorn, who runs Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, which specializes in organic and heirloom varieties of seeds. And we actually manage the wholesale arm of that business, because that business at some point outgrew Acorn. They had more work to do than they could actually manage as a community, and so started sort of delegating out parts of their business to other communities to help provide them with income sources. And partly because of the proximity, Twin Oaks was a natural candidate for some of that as well. But yeah, and then in terms of what does it look like? How does it work? Twin Oaks has about 7 different residence buildings. There's about 10 to 20 rooms in each building. Everybody gets their own room. And then there's various common spaces in each building, including a small kitchen. We also have a dining hall where there's lunch and dinner served every day. And it's up to you whether you want to go to the dining hall or make your own food. And basically just food is available. You can grab it whenever you need it. And then, the work areas range from everything from the various agricultural aspects, like the garden, the orchard, the dairy program, and milk processing, to the work in the businesses and managing the businesses. And then there's cooking meals for the community. There's all the cleaning that has to happen. There's all the maintenance work. We try to do as much of that ourselves as possible. So all of our plumbing, electrical, auto maintenance, all of this sort of stuff is done within the community as much as possible. The collective management of the finances and accounting and taxes and all that sort of thing. There's, people within the community do that. And then all of the governance of the community, the decision making about policies and budgeting and different things that are all managed by a series of teams that everyone has access to being on. And then, there's all sorts of social stuff that happens too. We have various holidays that we celebrate as a community, and helping to organize those holidays and throw parties is also part of the labor system, as well as, labor credits for taking care of people. There's unlimited sick hours available when you need that. And in terms of age range, we have our children are range right now from a few months old to 16 years old. And our adult members range from 19 or 20 to late 70s. So we've got full range there. We've had lots of children born in the community. We've actually had quite a number of elder members pass away at this point as well. So Twin Oaks is an interesting example of a community that next year will be 50 years old and has really managed to establish itself as a cradle-to-grave community.
And do you have a cemetery?
We do. We do actually have a cemetery. Yeah, and cool. Actually, Kat Kincaid, who I mentioned, one of the main founders, she passed away in the community about 10 years ago, I think, and she's buried there as well as a number of other people. There was a couple who had lived in the community back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then left. And after they left there, they had a daughter, and then their daughter was 18. This is a few years ago, and was in a tragic accident and ended up dying. And they asked the community if they could have their daughter buried in the community, and the community was happy to oblige. So yeah, there's definitely that extended community network. People who as we're gearing up for our big 50th anniversary celebration next year, we're being contacted by ex-members from back in the 70s into the 80s. I mean, all decades, who are really excited to come back. I mean, anyone who's lived there, was a pretty big experience for them.
So, are there families then that what's the social structure like?
Yeah, there are a number of families, and there's certain buildings that are more designed and geared towards families and where the families and children tend to live. And there's different sort of wings or niches within those buildings that the families kind of tend to cluster themselves in. And of course, there's atypical families as well. There's plenty of traditional family structures, but then there's also, couples, parents that have separated and but are still co-parenting and living within the community, though maybe they live in different buildings at this point, and their child sort of splits time between them. But of course, much easier to manage that logistically than if you live across town or in different states or whatever. Like many divorced couples have to deal with. And then there are also, there's, relationship models. There's plenty of people who are monogamous. There is some amount of open relationships in the community as well. So it's kind of all over the map in that respect. But, Twin Oaks is very much, has a strong practice of just letting people do their thing. Like, as long as it doesn't violate policy, as long as it's not, as long as it's in alignment with the community's bylaws, and as long as it doesn't violate the laws of the state or government or whatever, then we try and let people do what they're going to do as much as possible. And I think that kind of ethic of like wanting to allow people to just live their lives is an important thing in intentional communities in general. Again, within the bounds of how do we live well together, and how do we take into account the needs of the group, of the community, and balancing that with the individual. I think looking at lessons of intentional communities, that balancing act of individual choices, individual lifestyles, with the impacts that they have on others, on the environment, on all that sort of thing, and figuring out where that balancing point is really key. We live in this hyper-individualized society that completely downplays the fact that we have any impact on each other, when, of course, the irony is that we live in a society that has so fundamentally removed our ability to self-sufficiency or self-determinism that we are more reliant on each other than perhaps ever before in history. And yet we're living in this illusion that we are all in these hyper individualized bubbles, and that we don't really affect each other. So trying to move out from that and recognize that there is a sort of a dichotomy here of like the needs of the individual as well as the needs of the collective or of humanity as a whole, and how do we balance that?
How much of your resources, your food and such, do you bring in from outside? A question that's always thrown around in communities conversations for years has been, we want to be able to build sustainable communities that can, be self-sustaining, off-grid.
Yeah. Well, Twin Oaks has put, a significant amount of emphasis on that, and we probably, between our gardens, more limited orcharding that we do, and then our dairy program, we probably produce about 50-60% of our own food. And then the kinds of stuff that we buy, of course, are the bulk grains and beans, oils, these sorts of things that are, require large tracts of land and just a whole level of farming and intensified sort of activity than we're prepared to do. But of course, as a community, we try and buy organic as much as possible, but and also do what we can, buying local, all that sort of stuff. But I think there's just a reality of the difficulty of actually, I think if you want to grow 100% of your own food, like, that's a great goal. And if that, and I think sometimes people might underestimate the commitment that they would be taking on in that. And I think, especially if you can, you find yourself in an area where, it's not about, I think there's a little bit of this, like, again, we get into we extend this sort of individualistic attitude out from ourselves into, this some idealistic community that we want to form, where we still think of the community as being individual and sort of separate from. And it's like, well, it's still not. It's still part of society. And we still need to look at how it is integrated in and impacting both the local and national and global systems that it's a part of. So, I think, when you look at sort of slow food movements and all the local food movements and this sort of thing, like, personally, I don't see any need for a given community to be 100% self-sufficient as far as its food goes. Again, if that's your goal, if that's, like, exciting to you and part of your purpose, great, rock on. But I think it's just as valid to grow 10% of your own food, but then be getting, most of the rest of it from people around you in your region who you want to support.
That's part of building community.
In those activities. Right, exactly.
That is part of building. I've found, having lived in communities, from 92 on, and then moving here to Nevada, and incorporating and buying land and relating to the people in this very small town of like 350 people in a region. Our whole county has 2,500 people, and I'm the county reporter, so I tend, meet over, have met many people, and it's always with a sense of building community. The same principles that work when we're living on a piece of land together, apply in our daily lives with everyone around us. And, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think, there are various movements, that I think intentional communities movement is closely aligned with, and one of the most obvious ones being transition towns. And there's a sort of mix of success in terms of transition towns in the U.S. But I think the goal there is still, again, largely in alignment. You're working with a local area, municipality, a city, a town, whatever it is, to organize people to have the town ultimately take on an energy descent plan to, increase resilience and get it to a place where it can be self-sufficient in terms of energy and food production and that sort of thing, at least to some large degree. Now, of course, like, what's involved with that? Well, relationship building, of course. Like, there's no way that you can get everybody on board with something like that unless you're really cultivating the relationships and really figuring out how to develop that cooperative culture that includes being able to make decisions with each other in really equitable ways, really giving all of the people in that area access to the decision making, to the resources, to be able to engage cooperatively in that design. So yeah, I think we have to be looking at it on these multiple different levels. The level of individual, level of family, level of community, level of region, et cetera, et cetera.
So you said the form of nonprofit that you are is a 501(d). Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do all the businesses run under that as well?
They do. Yeah. And different communities, of course, do it different ways. There are communities that are just kind of, basic land trusts, where the land is held by some corporation, corporate entity that the members control, and then there's the individual houses that are built, and usually there's a 99-year lease or something to that effect, and then the house itself is usually owned by the individual, and there's a mortgage on that. That sort of thing. Other communities, simply organize themselves as LLCs, just, a really simple, easy way to hold title to land, and then, structure that however you want. The nice thing about LLCs is that you can basically structure them however you want. A common thing, especially there's a number of communities out there that I'm aware of who also do kind of education and outreach, are more sort of mission-driven in that sense. And they will often have an LLC and then also a 501c3 nonprofit, which is where their outreach and education efforts operate. And then, there's some kind of, agreement between the 501c3 and the LLC for use of the land and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but, because Twin Oaks was doing this income sharing thing, and that was the main feature of the 501d tax status, that would seem like the right way to go, and has worked well for the community.
At what point can someone be asked to leave the community?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, we do in our bylaws have laid out the different reasons why someone could be expelled from the community, and we also have, in addition, a very detailed policy for expulsion. I'm not going to remember all of the reasons right off the top of my head, but chief among them are doing anything that would put the community in serious danger, really threatening the existence of the community in some way. Also, not doing your share of the work of the community. That is also a basis for expulsion. And I should say with that, also in the Twin Oaks bylaws, it's very, we operate with the idea of from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. So for us, income sharing and our value of egalitarianism as a core value, it's not like this sort of old communist notion of everyone should have the same thing or everyone should have to do the same thing. It's really it's a more relative sort of thing. It's like what you are able to offer and what it is that you need.
I would say that it's more similar to a traditional tribal structure.
Sure. Right. Yeah. But at the same time, like there is work that we have to do. We have to maintain the community, and if somebody is clearly not doing what it is that they are able to do in a consistent way, that is potentially a source, a reason for expulsion. We also, nonviolence is a core value for the community. So any act of violence, especially physical violence, but we also have some definitions for emotional and verbal violence as well. And we don't necessarily have a absolute zero tolerance around it. I mean, obviously some actions would be, sufficiently egregious that it would be a very immediate, you need to leave kind of situation. In other cases, there was an incident a number of years ago where classic sort of situation, two guys got into a fight over a woman, one punched the other. Obviously this was a significant violation. There was also, I mean, we're human, we're complicated. There was some number of people in the community who kind of felt like the other guy sort of had it coming, but it was still unacceptable. And so the guy who did actually do the punching, he was required. It wasn't like you need to leave. It was like, okay, you need to go to therapy. You need to go through an anger management course. We need you to sign a behavior contract in the community affirming that you're not going to do this sort of thing again. But it was recognized like, yeah, we don't need to kick this person out, but we need to hold a boundary here, and we need to work with this person to make sure that this never happens again.
Yes, because absolutely, coming into the environment of communities and the community of people who live in community across America, and attending rainbow gatherings and, and observing that larger community and seeing the dysfunctions that are rampant in the nomadic peoples, who are wanting community, but then, we're dealing with people who have, addiction issues, psychological issues, and and this thought of how do we, help people come into community and still, and not have communities spun out. So, just looking at, at the whole population, of people who want to come in, and then what you have to deal with.
And I'm certainly aware of, plenty of communities who have dealt with, substance abuse issues, with mental health issues, and there's a clear desire on people's parts to work with that and accommodate that and help people, and I think that is a great aspect of intentional communities, that there is an ability to do that and a willingness to do that that you don't necessarily see otherwise, and a capacity to do that in terms of a group of people, being able to support a person in a way that they're just their partner or their family or what have you might not be able to. Now, of course, that said, any group still has whatever capacity it has on top of everything else it's trying to do to manage an individual in their group's issues that are coming up. And and I know at Twin Oaks and in other places as well, there's often, say, somebody's having a manic episode or something like that. We'll do our best to work with that person and try and bring them down. And there have been various points where we have had to just take somebody to a psych ward at the psych ward at the local hospital, just because we were it was clearly got to a point where they were, I remember one person I remember, they hadn't slept for days. They were just getting increasingly out there in what they were saying, including starting to make things that were essentially threats, not only against adults, but also children, like saying things about like kidnapping children. And it was like, okay, this is beyond what we can handle now. We're outside of the realm of our ability. And so the responsible thing really for all involved to do was to escort this person to the hospital. And ultimately that did help them get stabilized. And they were actually able to then re-enter the community. They left of their own choice, not too long after that, I think within a year after that, but it did actually, it worked and they were able to come in. But again, like being able to sort of make more strategic use of those sorts of, mainstream institutional structures. I mean, similarly with health issues in general, I mean, again, in terms of looking at benefits of intentional community, the kinds of sharing of resources and supporting each other and just healthier lifestyles that can happen there. And then, but then being able to make use of Western medicine or these sorts of things that are a little bit more controversial. I mean, like we just had somebody a few days ago at Twin Oaks who is part of our we have a forestry crew who all of the heat in all of our buildings is wood heat, and we have people who harvest trees from our woods to provide the heat for that. And he had a tree fall on his foot and fractured in 2 places, and he's laid up now, and he's actually a single father. But, it was really nice to be able to, take him to the hospital and being able to deal with that. But now but very immediately he was able to come home, and, he has this whole community of people that are bringing his meals to him, who are helping take care of his son, who are, doing the kinds of care work. Yeah, I mean, just trying to imagine somebody like that in a mainstream context, like what would they do? I mean, they would be horrible. Terrible, but yeah.
So, do you have group process then? I mean, within the community at all? I mean,
yeah,
how do you all
definitely do. I mean,
build together?
Yeah, I mean, I think every community does it differently. Every community has the different ways that they come together. And I think for many, if not most, most intentional communities out there share food to some degree or another. I had a friend a while back. We were talking about community and its difference between more overtly spiritual communities and less so. And he was saying, a shared spiritual practice is can be a really important or glue for a community, but in the absence of that, eating together will do. And I thought that was a nice way of putting it. Like, eating is in some ways a very spiritual thing, and eating together is this very sort of existential kind of bonding thing that you can do with people. Like, here we are sharing this nourishment, sustenance of life together, and that can be a really powerful bonding sort of thing. So I've almost never come across an intentional community of any kind that doesn't at least occasionally share meals together. So I think there's that. With at Twin Oaks, this very the fact that we share income and we have this whole labor system within the economy of the community and managing all of these collective resource sharing systems together. It just brings us together in very tangible ways on a daily basis. So not everybody together all the time. The Twin Oaks actually never does come together at the same time to do anything, but we have all these different points of contact between the work areas and eating meals and different social events that do happen, and the collective houses that people share, that it all, it does what it needs to do in terms of tying the social fabric together. And in other communities, I think it's similar. Other communities, especially communities that are smaller, and most are at least somewhat smaller, have more regular meetings of the whole community often. And that obviously serves as social glue, as well as doing whatever other kinds of shared, maintenance on facilities or that sort of thing that they might also share. But yeah, again, every community sort of does it differently in that respect. And then also when it comes to, conflict resolution stuff, I think, a good sign of a healthy community is one that has, good culture and sort of structures in place for supporting people dealing with conflict, because it's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. And I think a core thing that intentional communities have really been exploring and learning is this idea that conflict is not an indication that a group there are problems in the group, or that the group is dysfunctional or sick in some way. Your relationship to conflict is more the indicator there. And if you as a group you're able to recognize conflict is going to happen, and how are we going to approach that, that's what you're really, really looking for. And of course, the funny thing with many communities is that the flashpoints for conflict are often things that you never even realize. I like to say that what color to paint the walls is one of the most common conflicts in community. That in terms of like, you want to get people riled up and get them, have them try to decide what new color to paint the inside of the common building. Like that's going to get them going. Or anything related to
what point?
Oh my gosh.
At what point do you guys practice consensus versus democracy?
Yeah, again, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I think each group, any group out there, needs to just sort of figure out what works best for them. Twin Oaks again has this sort of hybrid system where we have a system where there are managers that are responsible for the day-to-day for all the different areas of the community. Sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's a co-managership, sometimes it's a team managership, but we delegate a fair bit of responsibility to people to just sort of make the calls over individual areas and manage their budgets and in terms of making sure that the work of the community gets done. And then there are all these different teams and committees that are responsible for different policy and budgeting aspects of the community. And within those, consensus is practice. So you might have a team of 3 to 5 people, like the membership team or the child board, say. And they will practice consensus amongst themselves, but they're not required to make sure that the entire community is in consensus with some decision. Now, any decision that is made by any team can basically be sort of appealed up the chain to the Board of Planners, which is the top level decision-making body, and any decision they make can be overridden by a simple majority of the full members of the community. So we have this sort of complicated committee-based structure with this kind of voting democratic cap. But consensus as a central practice is embedded within a lot of the decision-making structure of the community. And in general, we are looking for as close to consensus as we can get to, recognizing that to some degree, 90 adults are unlikely to always agree on everything. And so there's always going to be some number of people who are unhappy with a decision that's made, especially a more major decision, and we kind of accept that. And I think one of the things I've seen in community is that the idea of the loyal opposition is really important. Like if something is going to, is really, you feel like is really threatening the integrity of the community or is so intolerable to you personally, I mean, these are sort of the basic bases for blocking or vetoing in consensus. There's a lot of theory about, when is a block or a veto appropriate, but in my mind, those are some of the most core. It's like, this is threatening the existence or integrity of the group, or it is personally intolerable. Like, I will leave. I will have to leave if this happens. Those are the most core bases. Short of that, you don't like something, but it's like, I can live with it, then there is this responsibility to accept it and say, okay, I don't like this. This is not the way I think we should be going, but it's not that intolerable. And so I'm going to continue to support the community, and I'm going to accept that this is going to happen. Which again is, very counter to our training in mainstream society. I mean, to some extent in mainstream society, we're just sort of disempowered and not sort of given any opportunity on various levels to make any kind of real difference in decisions that are made, even decisions that affect our lives. But again, I mean, this is where intentional communities, I think, have a lot to offer, and that sense of kind of collective self-determinism, I would say, giving people that opportunity to have a voice. And again, I would, make a parallel to, say, the Occupy movement. And I think at its core, that's a lot what the Occupy movement was about, was trying to create this structure that would give people a very equal access to having their voice be part of the decision-making structure of what was going on in society. And it was trying to model that sense of, like, what would it look like if we, the people, were actually empowered and involved in the very real decision-making processes that affect our lives on all levels of our society. And, and of course it was a challenge. Of course, on some level, I'm like, of course Occupy fell apart in the way that it did. I mean, it's still going in some respects, and I think the contributions it made to the larger conversations that it was addressing were invaluable and really helped move us forward. But it is a particular movement to the extent to which it sort of has fallen away. It's like, of course, I mean, this is not what we're used to. There's so much to learn here. There's so much to unlearn here, that it creates almost insurmountable obstacles at times. And this is why, many intentional communities fail. I mean, intentional communities fail probably on the same order as, say, small businesses do, both for financial reasons, but also for social reasons as well. Like, working together is hard, and we're not taught to do it. And actually being able to go in and address the structural aspects, the cultural aspects, and the internal aspects that each of us are bringing into that, it's a lifetime job. Really.
We're all programmed, so we're always having to look at our own programming and continually grow. We have a caller, and I'm going to welcome the caller, and then I'd like to talk about, too, the safer a person who is looking to join community, how to take steps, and also for those who want to form community, like, who have a piece of land and who might want to follow the blueprint Twin Oaks is following. And finally, where the communities movement is right now. Let's welcome this caller. Welcome. You're on the air with us.
Well, hello.
Hello.
It's Red Clover Spade. I'm in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and I just think you really have conversations worth hearing, and so I'm calling in to listen to see, good stuff. This is the way we need to proceed if our species wants to continue.
Great. Well, let me ask you a question. Are you living in community where you are? Or what is your sense of community?
I actually live in a small little rural town here in rural America, and I have a couple of acres, and that's kind of my thing to do is grow food. So that's what I do on my couple of acres here.
So what are you growing?
Oh, well,
obviously it's winter.
Actually, right. We're kind of famous for raspberries, but been having problems keeping the bees happy and healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. So, Sky, a person who is wanting to come into community, where do they begin?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, there's lots of different entry points, and obviously there's more online resources now than ever before. I mean, so one of the main ones is, of course, the Fellowship for Intentional Community. On its website, we have the communities directory, which we also do a print version of, but online, the website is ic.org, and you can find the directory pretty easily in the top navigation bar. And there's a whole advanced search function that allows you to really zero in based on all sorts of different factors in terms of including geographical area, different kinds of decision-making processes, size, and the different kind of models that are out there. So you can kind of really play with that and sort of see what you're looking for that way. And then there's also there's other groups out there who also have listings kind of more specific to their particular model. So there's the Global Eco Village Network is another more global network at play. And so especially if you're looking more outside of the U.S., they have a more internationally than the FIC's directory does. But then there's also there's cohousing.org, the Cohousing Association of the U.S., and we actually have a data sharing agreement with them, and they pull from our listing, but their focus is on co-housing communities as a particular model. So if that's where you're more interested in zeroing in on, you can do that. There's also the National Association of Housing Cooperatives.
For listeners who aren't familiar, what is co-housing?
Mm-hmm, sure.
What is a co-housing community?
Co-housing is a model that was brought over from Europe. It was more developed in sort of Northern Europe. Denmark, I think, is where it was particularly this sort of came together as a model. But in some respects, co-housing is not that different from condominium development, where you have individual units, often that are attached, or a cluster of them are attached, all on one piece of property, and then there are some kinds of common facilities. I mean, many condominium developments have a swimming pool or something like that, or maybe some other kind of shared facilities. So co-housing communities often look very similar. You have individual units, kind of like single-family units, often attached or a cluster of them attached. There's usually a common house. Sometimes there's a swimming pool. So oftentimes there's, bike sheds and shared tool libraries and these sorts of different things that people are sharing. And the one of the main differences with a condo development would be that in the co-housing community, the members are the ones that control the entity that holds title to the land. And there's also an ethic of self-management. So most co-housing communities will be doing most of their own property management, as opposed to hiring a property management company or something like that. So it's a model of community that's been pretty successful in the U.S. and I think in some respects because it's the model that kind of looks the most like what your average American is familiar with. So it's a little more accessible from that perspective. And in terms of being able to buy a house, you're still looking at, depending on the market of that the co-housing community is part of, you're still looking at 150 to maybe 300,000 to buy a unit, but it's probably going to be significantly cheaper than buying a comparable house in that area because of how it's structured, and of course what you have access to living in a co-housing community is also much greater than what you're probably going to have just buying a house in whatever area you're in as well. So that's sort of the basics of what co-housing is, and I think it is sort of looked at. Co-housing tends to get a fair bit of media attention, especially because again, I think it looks more like what a lot of people are used to. It's usually in urban or suburban areas, and there's just a level of accessibility there. It's also a little less accessible in the sense of the financial buy-in that is still required, but increasingly co-housing communities are starting to address this more, either by having units that are owned by the community and are rented out, and there are newer co-housing communities that I've been hearing about that are actually building in affordable housing structures within the structure of the community. So that's co-housing in a nutshell. And the Co-Housing Association in the U.S., we at the Fellowship for Intentional Community, we have a close working relationship with there. We do a lot of this kind of cross promotion and collaboration on different things.
So, all right. So if somebody wants to join community, and they go to the website and they find a fairly up-to-date list of who is active, who's accepting people into community. Here's a funny question. How much space within community would you say there is across this land?
Well, it really varies. It really varies community, and it really varies over time as well. I mean, Twin Oaks, for example, has actually been full with a waiting list for most of the last 8 or 9 years. So we just this year we actually had a period where we dropped down from 90 to about 80 members, and for about 8 months we had quite a number of membership slots open. And at this point we've gotten back up to being full with a wait list again. But any community is going to go through periods like that where they're all of a sudden they have a few openings and then they fill up and then they've got a few more. So just because the community might be full at any given time, I'm like, if that's where you're really interested in, develop a relationship with them. Kind of keep checking in, keep going and visiting, make friends with people there. and something will come open. Something always comes open. And then there's lots of communities out there that are not full and that are actively looking for people. And in the communities directory on our website, that is indicated. Now, the information, you have to look at when was the listing last updated, and so it's possible that things will have changed in one way or another. But many communities out there, there are lots of communities that are, 10 or less people and are interested in growing to, say, 30 or 40. So they're very much still in a developing process and are looking for people to help them grow. So there are lots of communities out there like that. So you kind of got to just look at community by community. And then I think the other thing that I would say is that, I know in the, when people are buying a house, people are often advised, just look at lots of houses, even ones that you don't think you're going to want to buy. Just go look at them, and because it will help give you an idea of what it is that you are looking for. And I would say the same is true for communities. If the idea of doing a communities tour is a time-honored tradition at this point. People will make a cross-country road trip of it and visit half a dozen or more different communities, just to kind of get a sense of what the range is that's available out there, and what it is. Try to help them figure out what it is they're interested in, because what you think you are interested in, the reality of it might actually feel very different, or you might find that some things are less important than you thought they were, and other things are more important. So I think, and lots of communities out there also have structured visitor programs as well, where it's possible to go and just stay in the community for some period of time, often for some amount of fee or another, and so less or more in some cases. But it's specifically set up and structured to be able to give people an experience of the community in that way. So looking for examples like that. But yeah, Dancing Rabbit Eco Village comes to mind as an interesting example of community where, they're in northern Missouri, and an eco village as a model for intentional community is almost more sort of what you might call a floating signifier. It indicates things rather than being specific in terms of form. Clearly, it implies ecological. There's more of a focus around sustainability. So that's generally a key aspect of it. The Global Eco Village Network defines sustainability across 4 dimensions: social, economic, ecological, and cultural. Cultural, spiritual, they sort of have different ways of looking at that. But really looking at sustainability as encompassing all of those things. It's not just about ecological sustainability. You have to have social sustainability, you have to have economic, cultural sustainability along with that. And so then how does that play out? How do you practice that in the context of a village? And so Dancing Rabbit is an interesting community that's really pursuing this on a pretty intensive level. They're taking the ecological part of it to quite an extreme. There's basically they have a whole set of ecological covenants that include no use of fossil fuels on the property at all. So any vehicles that they have are all biofuel vehicles. They were not connected to the grid for a very long time until they made an arrangement to be tied to the grid to be able to sell power that they were generating back, and they have an agreement within the community that they will only do it as long as they are producing. I think it's something like twice as much power as the community is consuming. They're producing it based on solar and wind. It's quite a windy area, so windmills work really well for them. But they have internship programs. They run different educational programs. They have a visitor period, and they are about. It's somewhat seasonal. They range from about, I think, 50 to 70 people. But their goal is to be a village of 500 to 1,000. So, they've got lots of room, obviously, to grow, and they're actively looking for people to come and help them become this really powerful model of what a village really working on a core intensive set of ecological guidelines might look like. And really looking at like, how do we make this not feel like deprivation? How do we make this be a rich, juicy, satisfying, beautiful lifestyle, and not just feel like we're downgrading ourselves? But yeah, so again, I mean, I think they're one example. Co-housing communities are sort of another example. You have Twin Oaks with its income sharing thing on another side of things. So again, I would say, so for anyone who's interested in joining a community, it's like, really go out there and get a sense of the range of things, because it's really not a one size fits all. It's not monolithic in terms of the kinds of intentional communities that are out there. And, we're still sort of living with the preconceptions or stereotypes of 60s communes to a large degree. I mean, that's still something that's being confronted. And not that there are still some communities in existence that very much were part of the 60s communes movement. I mean, the farm in Tennessee is a great example of a community that absolutely had the spiritual leader, Stephen Gaskin, who led all of these people from California on this cross-country journey and ultimately landed with all of their school buses on this piece of property in Tennessee and started this commune. And it's gone through monumental changes over the years, and looks and feels much differently than it must have 30, 40 years ago, when it was 4,000 people, all very communal. And now it's about 300 people, with much more sort of individual financial arrangements, more like a land trust sort of situation, more businesses. They've got a more sort of professional, polished aspect to them now. But you go there and it's like, it still kind of looks like a hippie commune in some respects. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. I mean, it's a beautiful place, and what they've done there is amazing, and the longevity and strength and vitality of that community is amazing. And the farm is absolutely, it's one of certainly on the top 10 of communities I would recommend visiting. But again, just to sort of point out, like,
I have a very good friend who was part of the farm in the early days and has gone on to do so much good for the large community. Yeah,
right. Yeah, there's a lot of good service work, including international service work, that's come out of the farm. That's really, really impressive. I mean, I think the drive for a lot of intentional communities. I mean, there's a lot of intentional communities out there that are much more just kind of doing their thing. There's a sort of insular quality to them. And again, I think part of the legacy of the 60s communes was a little bit more of an escapist attitude. But there are lots of intentional communities out there that are quite the opposite, that really do see themselves, recognize how they are connected to larger society, and that they have a responsibility to be taking what they do out into the world. I mean, one of the earliest communities to identify itself specifically as an intentional community, and part of the sort of rebirth of that movement around the 40s was Koinonia Farms, which was established it was a Christian community, but a very progressive Christian community. It was a multiracial community, and Koinonia they started Habitat for Humanity, I think, in the 70s. So this little known fact that this amazing organization was actually started by this intentional community.
Well, they're good at setting intention.
Right. Yeah.
And following through. So, suppose someone like me has the intention ultimately of transforming this piece of property that belongs to the White Buffalo Nation, which is kind of a conundrum. We set up in 2004 when we came up here from Albuquerque as a Nevada nonprofit, and then chose for a variety of reasons not to get our 501c3. And so for better or worse, every year I file the taxes as a C Corp because I can't file a 990. And in all the work that I do and conversation on, sovereignty and correcting status and, what's the best way forward, I told you I was going to, I'm not quite sure how to proceed, and what resources and guidance for those of limited means who want to make the transition and be part of the network of communities and follow income sharing. One of my experiences in the years, particularly from 92 till 2003, when I lived in various communities on pieces of land that were communal, is after a time, sometimes I felt like I was working on Maggie's farm. It's like you go to a community, you go to a piece of land, and they get what they can out of you. You help build something or clear something, and then they decide they don't like you. And, but then on the other side of it, the first community that I went to, Christmas Star, which was founded by John Cohen and his wife, Gaylyn Cohen, ultimately when they reached out for, funding, the people who came in, they were no longer welcome on their own land. And, I won't name any names, but, part of the community survived, and I believe it's in the directory. And so, as the person now who's caretaker of a piece of property and ready to let people in, but, not wanting to see either of those functions, to create something, because that's the thing. I mean, and I tell people in my community, I've had, a few local people live on the land or try and live in the building, which isn't finished. So, it's hard in the summer and it's hard in the winter, because right now the 32 by 60 cedar-sided building was built 45 years ago and was never finished. And my late husband, it was incredible, to get your hands on a 1-foot cement foundation with two 1,500-gallon septics in a county with no building codes. But at the same time, it's like if I'm going to, to me, my motto has been for years as White Buffalo, sustainable communities with sustainable businesses, gardens, and schools for nomadic people of conscience. And now I guess I'd say savages, with the correct legal term for Indians. And it's, so in a sense, listeners, it was kind of selfish of me to have this conversation with Sky because, I want to move forward. And I know there are other people out there, like I say, on both sides of that equation,
Right.
So
yeah.
How do we move forward?
Well, there's definitely, I'm afraid to say there are definitely no easy answers to this. And it definitely takes a lot of research and really digging in and figuring out what's going to work best for your particular group, because a lot of it is so much affected by the particular laws of your state, of your county, in terms of what kinds of legal entities are available to you, in terms of what kind of zoning regulations you're dealing with.
We have no zoning. Sort of stuff. And I got the from properties.
Right. This is certainly one of the things that people have to consider. I mentioned Dancing Rabbit Eco Village. Part of their story is that they were started by a group of people who had been living together while they were going to school at Stanford University, and they decided they wanted to do this Eco Village thing, and they worked for like 4 years, is my understanding, trying to establish their Eco Village in California, and eventually gave up because of zoning regulations and the cost of land and move to Northeast Missouri, where
Well,
land is
I
so
will
cheap and
tell
you can basically
everybody-
do whatever you want.
Yeah, I will tell everybody a shout out to listeners who are looking for a place to form community. My late husband, Dr. Vegas Soto, and I, when we got the land, is inexpensive. Within and around Crescent Valley, there's no zoning. So, I mean, you have to be, electric company and get your, if you're going, and we do, atmospheric water generation, alternatives for, even though, I'm on the municipal.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there's those considerations to have. I mean, I think, part of what you're talking about, though, is, I mean, I think there's a lot to be considered. I mean, again, I tell you, when we're talking about intentional communities, again, there's some intent there or purpose, shared values, again, this sort of thing. I mean, and I think one of the best tools that a community has for being able to grow and grow in the ways that it wants is to be really clear about that. Is to be clear about what it wants, what's it doing. I mean, again, in the realm of looking at all the different kinds of structures, legal structures, governance structures, decision-making structures, the one piece of advice is, really get a clear vision of what it is that you want the community to look like, and then figure out what structures are going to support that the best. So, again, I mean, being really clear about what it is that you want, what your purpose is, what your intent is, what your values are. I think, that it can't be underestimated how important that work can be. And then that feeds into another thing that I think is really key, which is which is membership. I mean, how are you bringing in new people? How is that process working? And I think the integration of new members is also a huge key facet of this. Now again, a community like Twin Oaks that's been around for a long time and is larger, or even a community like Dancing Rabbit that's been around for about, they're getting close to 20 years right now and is a little smaller, but they've been doing their thing long enough. And they've got enough of a critical mass of people there that when one new person comes in, it's fairly easy to integrate them. There's all of the cultural stuff is there, and it doesn't sort of throw off the community when new people come in. Now, there's smaller urban communities. There's a community. I don't even know where they're at this point, but it was called the Emma Goldman Finishing School in Seattle. And they used to be they were part of the Federation of Egalitarian Communities. They were an income-sharing community, really radical orientation as a smaller, they were about 10 or 11 people, urban community in Seattle. And then they went through a lot of transition. They had a lot of new people. At some point, not too long ago, all of a sudden the person that had been there the longest had only been there 3 years. And a lot of the new people just had really very little interest in the more sort of radical social justice oriented mission that the community had been founded on. They started moving away from their income sharing agreements, and they disconnected themselves from the Federation of Egalitarian Communities and just largely, stopped engaging much at all. The last person at that community who was really involved with, more connected to this larger movement of stuff, we were talking with him and like how to get that community reconnected, and he was like, I can't even get people who live in my house to go to a potluck of collectives a few blocks away, let alone trying to connect with this national organization. And it was kind of a tragic thing. And I know there were actually ex-members of that group that were kind of in touch with them and trying to sort of say, hey, we really founded this community based on something larger than this, and would really like to see this going. But the people who lived there, they just decided it wasn't important to them, and so all of that just largely fell away. And I think, as smaller, especially urban groups with more transition, you're going to have a harder time with that. To some degree, being able to create more of a bubble, it has its drawbacks in terms of potential for isolation and insularness and that sort of thing. But doing that, does kind of give you more of an opportunity to really set up the kind of culture and structures and that sort of thing that you want to be able to bring new people in and not rock the boat. I mean, I think the other big balancing point is, how institutional do you want to make your group? I mean, Twin Oaks has, I think, really relied on it being very institutional. I mean, I like to say that Twin Oaks is the most bureaucratic commune you're ever going to come across. And I think, and I know Kat Kincaid, the main founder and the person who's largely credited with writing the bylaws of the community, I mean, she straight up said at some point, we built Twin Oaks so no one could kill it. Their orientation was very much to set something up that was going to be resilient to turnover, and that was not going to allow for any one person or any group of people to do a power grab or anything like that. It basically setting up a community that would be kind of self-protective of itself against, forces internal or external that might want to take in a direction different from its original founding. So, but I think that there's an interesting thing there, especially for people who want to start a community and they do already have land and they're looking at bringing people in. There's a lot of insecurity there, absolutely, and there's danger there. I mean, I don't think that can be underestimated either. And there's a big kind of
I've been robbed a couple
of
times. I had a guy drive off with my car who I was like, I mean, fortunately, dropped me off somewhere. People steal things, and you go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, in that sense, there's a couple different approaches, sort of broad approaches to community building that I've seen. I mean, one is more the build it and they will come model of community, and I think again, co-housing as a model has,
and that does happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say when Dr. Bagrisoto and I moved out here, and I always espoused, following the Algonquin Iroquois peace principles for years. And lo and behold, within 2 years after we moved out here, this man showed up, Bill Records, Medicine Bear, who started a totally solar, in theory, community on basically co-housing, everybody buying land, doing a sweat and all this, operating under Algonquin Iroquois peace principles. So just the energy of what we were doing, I mean, yes,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and that part of it is holding the intention and holding the idea. It's really funny because Dr. Bagrisoto died 3 years ago, December 6th. And yet I can totally see the property as we visioned it, even though it doesn't look like that now. And so,
Right. Well, and I think, one way of approaching, building a community for somebody who's interested in doing this, they have a piece of land, they're wanting to turn it into a community, and they don't want to be necessarily at the center of things, but they also don't want to, lose what they have. They don't want to all of a sudden be homeless, essentially. Yeah. I mean, so there's there's always different things that you can do in terms of setting up the financial arrangement of the community so that new people coming in, there's some level of buy-in, which could be in a lump sum up front, it could be over time, but that basically buys out the original owner or owners of the land, so that basically you get your investment back, so that even if ultimately you either because something really unfortunate happens and the new community sort of votes out the founder or something like that.
Exactly.
Or simply because, it also happens sometimes that somebody, people start a community and then 10 years down the road, it has turned into a community that they're just not interested in living anymore. No malice, no ill will, no
exactly.
bad intent. It's just all of a sudden it's like, this didn't actually quite turn out the way I wanted it to, and I don't want to live here anymore. But now where do I go?
Right.
Because this was my life savings or whatever it is. Well, you can set it up. You can basically have some arrangement where the original investors, whether they were members of the community or not, are just bought out. I think there is something there too that's often useful. I think the question of buy-in for a community is an important one. Obviously lots of communities are very interested in wanting to be accessible. They don't want to just be open to people who happen to have some tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets or borrowing ability available to buy in or build a house or that sort of thing. At the same time, there are often financial realities that have to be considered, and then there's also just the aspect of buying in as a form of investment that creates a level of commitment and responsibility as well. I think a couple groups I've worked with, you start looking at things like sliding scale or and sweat equity and things like that help provide accessibility, but there's still being some amount of financial contribution required. Sort of the skin in the game sort of aspect of it that gives people more of a sense of like this is mine, and not only mine, it's ours. But I'm going to relate to it as something that I personally
one could also
care about.
Bring people in, bring people in on the title,
Right.
So people know they're
of course.
not going to be, invest 10 years of their life, and then you say, you know what, I really don't like you anymore. Could you clear out?
Right. Yeah. I think any group that you come across where the pathway to being a part of the decision making, the core decision making body, the full member, whatever you want to call it, there needs to be some clear pathway to how do I become part of the group of people who have fundamental core decision making authority here. And then of course, like we were talking about with Twin Oaks, like there might be some basis built into your operating agreement, your bylaws or whatever for expulsion. So, there are certain lines that you can't cross, and if you do, then you will be expelled from the community. Short of that, you are a full player in the decision-making process of the community. That decision-making process is very clearly lined out. And your ability to be part of that is not revocable by anyone else. If there isn't a clear pathway to that, and then in parallel, if there isn't a clear pathway to ownership, like you're talking about, now that might be multiple people holding title to the land, that might be multiple people being identified as the members or whatever it is that are legally the ones that are controlling the legal entity or corporate entity that's holding title to the land. These things need to be clear. Those pathways need to be clear. I think if a group is not clear about who makes the decisions, who is owning the community, financial transparency, if all those things aren't really laid out, it's probably not a community you want to get involved with. And I think anyone looking to start a community, those should also be very paramount. In terms of things that you need to establish early on.
So where does one find templates then for an income sharing community?
Well, there's for income sharing in communities in particular, the Federation of Egalitarian Communities does have the website is thefec.org. And there is a section of that website for that systems and structures, and it's basically a wide range of both founding documents, bylaws, that sort of thing, as well as policies on all sorts of different aspects of community from a range of the different communities that are members of the Federation of Egalitarian Communities. So that's definitely a really good resource. The FEC is actually also, we're in the process of working on we're doing a project we're calling Commune in a Box. And right now we're using a wiki platform, and we're developing a whole body of writings about how to specifically develop an income sharing community. So hopefully, within, certainly, I think sometime this year, sometime in 2017, we'll have that out in some form, and we're hoping to be able to provide it in sort of a variety of formats. So there's that. The FIC, Fellowship for Intentional Community, all these acronyms get a little confusing sometimes, but again, on IC.org, one of the things that the FIC has been doing for a long time is publishing Communities Magazine, which is a quarterly publication, and each issue has a theme, and then we've also created best of compilations of articles on particular topics. So both forming communities and starting communities, as well as different aspects of things like community businesses, decision making, all this sort of thing. There are these best of communities compilations of articles on these different topics. So that's definitely a really good place to kind of go through and browse and see what resources are available there. Because Communities Magazine has been being published for decades at this point, and so there's a pretty wide range of wisdom and experience represented there. And then I also can mention that there is one particular book that was written called "Creating a Life Together" by Diana Leaf Christian, who lives at Earth Haven Eco Village outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and it's kind of the Bible of starting a community. Like it is the the best laid out. It's the book that has been written on how to start a community. It just goes through all of the different aspects of what's involved, the different pitfalls, questions you need to be asking, all that sort of stuff. She actually also wrote a follow-up book called, it's Finding, I'm not remembering the title off the top of my head. Same author, Diana Leaf Christian, but it is a book on finding communities, on joining communities. So basically,
wonderful. Are you still there, Sky? Sky?
Hello?
Sky?
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can
now
hear
I
you.
can hear you.
Yeah, okay,
now
great.
I can hear you.
Great. Okay.
So you were saying
Creating
about
a Life
the
Together.
second book.
Yeah. Just that it's, she Diana Leaf Christian in that book just really laid out the way to go about finding the right community to join as the sort of companion to Creating a Life Together, which outlines how to go about starting a community.
Are there also funding resources within the alternative communities world for infrastructure development so that, one has alternatives to Wells Fargo and Chase and, other entities that for other reasons people are perhaps choosing to cut their ties with?
There definitely are some things out there. There's, some. It's not. This is probably the biggest, if not one of the biggest barriers, is funding. Including access to land, just being able to get the funding together to be able to buy land. There's so many people out there who would love to help start intentional communities, and it's just a bit too big of a barrier. There's it depends a lot on what exactly you're doing as well. But if you're working, especially if you are more aligned with kind of the cooperative housing and cooperative business world, if you're working a little bit more in those sorts of, within those models and structures, there's the National Cooperative Bank as one option. I'm not sure, I'm not remembering off the top of my head the different criteria for funding, but there is a group out there that's comes up frequently called the North Country Development Fund. There are different kinds of, again, it depends on what you're doing, and getting creative in terms of cobbling together funds. If you are interested in going more of a community land trust direction, and a community land trust is a very particular kind of legal entity that is actually set up as a 501c3, but it has a public responsibility, and very particular, structures for how it's supposed to be set up. But as a 501c3, it's available for tax-deductible donations, grant funding, that sort of thing. So there's, if you use that structure, that can open some doors. Again, obviously, more mission-driven projects, you might be able to get funding in for programs that help you develop a kind of financial or economic base that can help provide financial stability for the community. Obviously, when you're getting into the world of grants, foundations, very, very few out there, from my understanding, are interested in helping with land acquisition. They want you to be past that point. So that's not necessarily a good thing there. But if you've gotten past that sort of initial point, and then want to be doing things to help develop the community, you can start looking in that direction. And then I think the other thing that you can kind of keep in mind is that there's a lot of there's a benefit to trying to start a community where other communities have already started. Again, I know the co-housing world has definitely had experience with this, where if you've got a community that's managed to get off the ground, and they had some interaction, with a local financial institution, be it a bank, a credit union, or whatever, and you are able to sort of present yourself as doing something similar, then that financial institution is like, well, we did it once, maybe we could do it again. Whereas a financial institution that's never done anything like it before is going to see it as very risky. So that's definitely something to keep in mind too, in terms of being able to access funding even from more mainstream institutions. And at least in theory, credit unions should be friendly to this sort of thing. Now, obviously, the credit union world, credit unions are a form of cooperative enterprise. They are a consumer cooperative at their core, and cooperatives are supposed to follow certain cooperative principles, including support of other cooperatives. Now, unfortunately, lots of credit unions in this country have lost their identity largely of being cooperatives or being part of a larger cooperative movement. But it doesn't hurt to try and help them remember that. And some of them are much more friendly to it as well. Like I know in the Northeast, in particularly Western Massachusetts, there's a local cooperative business network that does actually include, I think, at least one credit union, and they've done a lot to help financing both, particularly of cooperative businesses, but that could extend to other kinds of to housing cooperatives or more residentially oriented things as well. So I think unfortunately, I think there is a certain amount of activism in the financial realm that is often required in terms of helping start communities as well, because again, like financial institutions, even the more progressive ones, often just have no idea what you're talking about when you want to present them with something like this.
Right. So, looking at Twin Oaks, is it just humming along? Do you see need for improvement anywhere?
Of course. I mean, one of the things that the catchphrases that developed at Twin Oaks somewhere along the lines is, it's not utopia, but you can see it from here. So, we're in view. It's like, just over that hill over there. It's like we're getting there. But Twin Oaks is interesting. I mean, again, it's going to be 50 years old next year. Obviously, it's got staying power. Twin Oaks its financial history is interesting. The community early on, experimented with a variety of different cottage industries to be the sort of financial heart of the community. And within, I think it was about 7 or 8 years, the hammocks business was, I think the community bought the hammocks business. I don't think it started it from scratch. But it worked, and took off, and very quickly, actually, the community signed a contract with Pier 1 Imports back when Pier 1 Imports was still a relatively small company. And then as Pier 1 grew, it started ordering more and more hammocks, and that helped provide a increasing financial base for Twin Oaks. My understanding is at the peak of it, Pier 1 was buying, I believe, tens of thousands of hammocks from Twin Oaks.
Oh my
and Twin Oaks
goodness.
had actually, Twin Oaks actually had started sharing the business with East Wind. I mean, we actually had production facilities at both Twin Oaks and East Wind in southern Missouri, and then later on actually started farming out production of particular models of hammocks to other communities as well. So unbeknownst to them, Pier 1 Imports for 10, 20 years was actually a major financer of the communities movement. I mean, a number of communities got their start, or helped them along at points by making hammocks for Twin Oaks hammocks. Then in 2005, after a steady decline for a number of years, Pier 1 stopped buying hammocks from Twin Oaks. And that was a pretty big blow to the community's income. Basically, a quarter of our income evaporated overnight. And so that's when we had already started the tofu business, but then we very quickly started ramping up the tofu business, because that was where there was growth potential. Hammocks, it's this sort of like luxury furniture item just in general was not, as the 2000s were progressing and the economy was getting steadily worse leading up to the 2008 collapse, that sort of thing was just not being bought as much, whereas organic tofu is actually still on the incline in terms of
right.
sales nationally. So that was like, okay,
well, sure, and you guys were able to get you guys were able to get non-GMO soybeans. Cool.
Yeah, I think we buy our the organic soybeans. I think it's like the only grower of organic soybeans in the state of Virginia. Yes, but there is a producer that we do manage to buy from. And we're actually we've been in a long multi-year process of actually building a major addition to the tofu facility, where it should be, we will, once it comes online, we should be able to quadruple our production. But it actually has been a struggle for the last 10 years or so to kind of restabilize our finances and get this new production facility online. And our income dropped quite a bit when Pier 1 dropped us, and then it recovered some, but it's still more or less at early 2000 levels, and obviously cost of living keeps going up. So, the community has been feeling some of the crunch from that. At the same time, the community had managed to build up a base of capital assets that had over $1 million value. We own 450 acres of land. I mean, there's just, the base of resource there is tremendous. I mean, our income could in fact drop to zero for several years before we were, started facing insolvency or anything like that. And we don't have a mortgage. I mean, we have zero debt.
Sustainability. That is wow.
So
outrageous.
So I think, so I think, we were, and again, with the amount of I mean, we operate the amount of money we make as a community when you divide it up for tax purposes, just to assign something on the sort of the member share for income tax purposes. The Twin Oaks operates on around $6,000 or $7,000 per person per year, and so it's just it's incredibly low. Well under, what the minimum, the high level of the poverty line is generally considered to be. And yet our lifestyle is fairly middle class in many respects. I mean, the sort of collective aspect is obviously very different, but in terms of the access to resources we have and the general quality of life, it's very high. I mean, and I think about it for myself personally. I mean, the amenities within the community include, a community music room with all sorts of different equipment, weight room and exercise equipment, a pond and a sauna, all these things that me personally, as a, mid-30s, it's like, sure, if I had spent the last 10, 15 years of my life really pursuing a career and, doing the whole rat race thing, yeah, I might be able to have access to all of that stuff. But I know I have plenty of friends out there who are in their 20s or 30s, struggling to make ends meet, paycheck to paycheck. They don't have a sauna. They don't have a music room, So it's pretty amazing.
Right. We're supposed to have all those things here, and we do have gyms. But again, I see the building how it's supposed to be, and I know that as a community, it can be done, and we actually represent all kinds of, amazing technologies, water generators, alternative energy. I mean, working on a relationship with the Hempcrete guys from Canada, have them hopefully come down, do a workshop, finish the building in Hempcrete, and then, rep Hempcrete, in this region. Things like, it's all, moving forward. But, I really appreciate, I hope listeners do too. You've covered so much. Is there, as we finish, is there anything in particular you'd like to say to people?
Well, I guess one plug that I'll make is that the FIC Fellowship for Intentional Community, www.ic.org. We are in our kind of big end of year fundraising drive right now. So donations at this point are really appreciated and are of course tax deductible. We are a 501c3. And the FIC actually as an organization will be 30 years old next year. It was formed, sort of reformed, actually, in 1987. So there's quite some history going on there. And as a scrappy grassroots organization, we've certainly struggled to increase our income to meet the demands of the growing intentional communities movement. So certainly now is a time where we need support more than ever. And I would say, the FIC is also very well positioned to really accelerate the development of the intentional communities movement and amplify the impact that it has on society, and also to continue to develop the connections between the intentional communities movement and all of these other aligned movements out there, all working towards cooperation and sustainability and social justice. I mean, we're one piece of this much larger puzzle of movements on a global, not just national scale of really trying to change things in the world. So there's lots more. The Communities Directory is a pretty unique resource in terms of the comprehensiveness of the listings and the information it's providing on different intentional communities in the U.S. and around the world. And there's lots more functionality and interactivity that we would love to build into it. We'd really like to. We do have a wiki of resources, and in addition to the Communities magazine articles and best of compilations, and we'd really like to develop all of that more into sort of a solutions library, toolkit, selection project. We have a list of process consultants on the website, so you can go and you can look by region and see different people around the country who are experts in different kinds of group process and collective decision making and this sort of stuff. That you can contact for support, and we'd really like to develop that into a community consultants program where we can really kind of provide more direct resources and tailored advice to people. So I mean, the list goes on. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting things we could be doing, and we're really in a position of, we need a new level of support from our base to be able to provide these things.
Well, wonderful. And as I mentioned when we first connect, I look forward to having you on and others associated with you so we can continue this conversation, because, Saturdays are our Standing with Standing Rock, Savage Sovereignty and Water Protectors Council that's ongoing. And then Sundays are the days we spend addressing and informing people on extinction level threats, radiation, things you can be taking into your body to eliminate heavy metal toxicity. And then we turn to utopian solutions. And, I have to say, Sky, when I first was introduced to community, the gentleman I was traveling with from Eugene, we actually sat down with the communities directory in one of the co-ops in Eugene, and we looked through the communities directory, and he knew where he wanted to take me, but it was Christmas, and I remember sitting there and reading the entry in the communities directory. So I'm a living example of the benefit of the work that you guys are doing. It's so appreciated.
That's fantastic.
So are you having anything then on the ground for the 50th anniversary that people can come to?
Well, the 50th anniversary of Twin Oaks it's unfortunately, I mean, we are having it as an invite-only event. It's not going to be a public event, and mostly that's just because we do have a limited capacity of how many people we can have come, and we need to prioritize ex-members. It's primarily a celebration for ex-members, but there may be some ancillary events that we set up that might be a little bit more open to the public. So people can certainly, twinoaks.org is the website there. So for people interested in what Twin Oaks is doing, you can go there. But yeah, we actually know we have record of all of the people who have been members of Twin Oaks, and over the almost 50 years there are approximately 850 ex-members, not all of whom we are in touch with, and some of whom have passed away, but we've already been contacted by about 200 ex-members who want to come back and celebrate for 50th anniversary, because it's quite a milestone. There are only a handful of intentional communities in the country who have been around that long. So it's definitely an important thing to celebrate, an important inspiration for other people who are doing this work, and to really be able to see, it is possible. If you really sort of do your homework and come at it with a really open mind and open heart, a really genuine willingness to learn and, like I said, unlearn the different things that we're taught that get in the way of this work that we're doing. It really is possible to create these other ways of living, and to help make those other ways of living accessible to more and more people, as well as influence the larger society in the direction of creating a cooperative culture that can work for all people and all life on the planet.
Well, and it's so important right now. So many people are concerned about what is coming with the change in administration and want to put their energies into the positive. And for myself, I always see the communities like little campfires of light, across the land, And so is there any vision for the future you'd like to listeners with, Sky?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can take these values, and we can fundamentally restructure society. We do have a choice here. And I one of the things that sometimes, in the world of consensus in particular, sometimes people will say, oh, consensus doesn't work, or it doesn't work for larger groups. And I can point to all sorts of examples that where you can see large scale organizing happening with really truly democratic, and I'm not talking about just voting, I'm talking about really democratic, decision-making processes, and, different example. I mean, like, the 1999 WTO protests in Seattle. I mean, you had tens of thousands of people in coordinated action being organized by a consensus-based spokes council. I mean, that was an amazing example of what can be done on a large scale like that. You have, whole new societies evolving, like the Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico. I mean, they are really taking on a larger scale than what we can kind of conceive of to a large extent, and making a democratic egalitarian society there. If you look back historically at cooperative movements in the United States, you had a time back in the 1800s before the Civil War where between manufacturing and agriculture and consumer cooperatives, there were millions of people involved in a very genuinely cooperative, democratic economy and society being developed. And then, different forces, including the Civil War, took that apart. But we have these inspirations there. We have these models that where we can look back and or contemporary models we can look at and say, no, this is possible on a global scale. And it is about empowerment. It is about taking our power back, learning how to empower ourselves, empower each other, learn how to leverage collective action, hold corporations accountable, hold public officials accountable, and really make this happen on a global scale. It is possible.
On that note, thank you, Sky, so much.
You're very welcome.
Listeners,
you're so welcome.
We'll speak again. And listeners, together, let's sustain life on planet Earth. That's yours, mine, and all of ours, and in the land, waters, and air. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, this is Siava, Lisa Wolf for Slope. Save and sustain life on planet Earth. Earth Aid now. Let's give the Earth and all her children freedom from fear, lack, and degradation, and bring a utopian reality now. Thanks again, Sky.
You're welcome.
There is more to me, Queen Eliara of Elfgard, than my elven magic. Just as there's more to Geico than saving you money, Geico also gives you 24/7 access to licensed agents online, on the phone, or on the Geico app. And while I am a mighty elf queen, I am also a mighty big fan of barbecue potato chips. Minions! More smoky mesquite.
Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.